grandson enjoyed his first football game.
How old is he?
He's 8.
Oh, wow.
Made it till halftime.
Oh, he did? Well, that's pretty good.
I call to order this regular meeting of the Mount Pleasant City Commission this Monday, October 14th, 2019. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Clerk, has the roll been taken?
It has all are present tonight except for Commissioner Lalone.
Okay. First on our agenda is a proclamation recognizing Indigenous Peoples' Day.
Mayor, would you like the chief to join you as you read it?
Yeah, Chief Ekdahl, come on. Whereas, in 2010, the state of Michigan, the county of Isabella, and the city of Mount Pleasant recognized the official boundaries of the Isabella Indian Reservation through a historic set of agreements. And whereas, these historic agreements amicably settled long-standing Indian country jurisdictional issues and are now considered model agreements for the rest of the country. And whereas, the city of Mount Pleasant desires to demonstrate and celebrate its strong, productive relationship with the Saginaw Chippewa Tribal Council based on mutual respect and trust. And whereas, the idea of Indigenous Peoples' Day was first proposed in 1977 by a delegation of Native nations to the United Nations-sponsored International Conference on Discrimination against Indigenous Populations in the Americas. And whereas, Indigenous Peoples' Day is an opportunity to educate about pre-existing Indian cultures that have survived an often violent colonization process and continue to exist and thrive in present-day America. Now, therefore, I, William L. Joseph, Mayor of the City of Mount Pleasant, do hereby proclaim the second Monday in October Indigenous Peoples' Day. And further, the city supports that Indigenous Peoples' Day be used to reflect upon the ongoing struggles of Indigenous people on this land and create and celebrate the thriving culture and value that the Saginaw Chippewa and the other Indigenous peoples add to our city and community. And further, the City of Mount Pleasant City Commission recognizes the value of working collaboratively together with the Saginaw Chippewa Tribal Council and looks forward to addressing areas of mutual concern in our community. In witness whereof, I hereunto set my hand and the great seal of the City of Mount Pleasant, Michigan, this 14th day of October, 2019.
Buju, Wagosh Nindijna Kazmakwa Dodam, Saginaw Chippewa Nindunjaba. Mayor Joseph, Commissioners, just want to say miigwech for this recognition and this proclamation, of this this day. I mean, it's very significant, day in history. Where I'm very proud to say that I'm from a city that has been doing this and made this a tradition year after year, and now today in the state of Michigan, they're also following suit. And we were first, we were behind that, and I think we can be very proud as a community as a whole that we were able to do that and we were able to recognize that, and we can kind of set the tone for how the entire state looks at today. Whether or not you agree or disagree with today, I think it's a great opportunity to learn and to educate yourselves and to take advantage of the wonderful melting pot we have in Mount Pleasant and everything that the tribe does for the community, for the city, for the county, and just the rich culture that we're able to bring here and all the resources that we're able to share. So Chimigwech for this once again. We're very grateful. I know our community is very grateful. This is something that's celebrated every year, either in a good way or a bad way, but recognizing that people are taking the time from our own community to recognize our history, it really means something to our people. So, Chimigwech.
Miigwech.
Yes, I had the job of introducing our drum. So we have our community drum here to sing a song for us. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to them. If it's customary to stand if you're able to stand during the song. So, Miigwech.
Chimigwech for coming today. Our next presentation is by McKenna & Associates on our 2050 master plan. I believe we have Paul from McKenna today.
Good evening, Commission and members of the community. That was a wonderful ceremony. Certainly pleased to have been up here tonight to be a part of it. I'm here tonight to talk to the Commission about the 70% draft of the master plan. We were here a couple weeks ago. We met with the DDA, the Parks Commission, and the Planning Commission to go through the 70% draft. We call it a 70% draft because we really think it's complete. We think it's something that is ready to be considered for adoption and considered for public comment. But before we get to that point, we want to offer the opportunity for the commission as well as the subcommittees or DDA, Parks Commission, and Planning Commission to provide important feedback and to share that feedback with staff before we begin the public adoption process, which is a process that involves posting and collecting public feedback. I'll go through that a little bit as well in my presentation this evening. So what I want to cover, and I might go kind of fast because I want to be respectful of your time. I want to share with you a little bit about the plan contents, which is divided into 5 chapters: sustainable land use, connected mobility system, focused redevelopment, exceptional parks and public spaces, and innovative services and aspirations. And then I want to walk through the next steps in the process. Just a quick reminder, I was here following the charrette to discuss what we called the 30% draft, and the 30% draft essentially was all of the big ideas, the big pictures and major recommendations that we intended to write up in the draft that you have now for review. And that came from the charrette. So we did do a week-long charrette as part of the process, and the charrette was designed to generate candidate recommendations with residents and key stakeholders around the community, evaluate those recommendations, and then get to a point where we had a community preferred option for some of the major elements of the plan. Master plans, of course, are different than zoning ordinances. The city recently adopted a complete update to the zoning ordinance. Master plans are long range by nature. So a lot of the ideas that you'll see in this plan are ideas that have 30-year timeline. So we've called it Mount Pleasant 2050. And master plans are updated every 5 years. So what we want to do is think big enough that the ideas are long range and transformative, but also provide guidance on the things the city can work to implement over the near term in the next 5 years before it's time to update the plan again according to state law. So the zoning ordinance are immediate, they govern today. The master plan provides guidance, while the zoning ordinance is a regulatory tool. It is the regulation that applies to land in the city today. And the master plan is a policy document. So we want to establish policy for city decision makers to work on implementing, and the zoning ordinance is enforced. So there's some key differences between these two documents, but both of them are work together. So one of our challenges in the master plan process is to ask ourselves, how might we want to influence zoning in the city over a period of time? And as I said, one of the most important things to remember about the master plan document is it's a policy document, and it's something the city looks at every 5 years. So what we want to do is make sure we're going in the right direction. But a lot of the ideas that you see in the plan are ideas that have existed in other master plans the city has completed, and we were reaffirmed as part of the charrette process that indeed these ideas are things that the city still wants to work toward. So I mentioned the master plan is divided into 5 books, and when we print it up, it will actually be in 5 separate books, magazine folded. And the reason why we've done that is to make it more accessible and to allow people to basically get to the information they want and make it more usable. We did spend a lot of time thinking about how to design the information in a way that was most accessible. And there is a lot of information, so that's one of the reasons it's broken out. So the first chapter, Sustainable Land Use, answers the question, how should we grow? The second, Connected Mobility Systems, answers the question, how do we get there? Focused Redevelopment asks the question, where should we grow? Exceptional Parks and Public Spaces asks the question, where should we play? And Innovative Services and Aspirations asks the question, what should we do now? So in all of these chapters together will form the policy and the vision for the city's master plan in the coming years. Within sustainable land use, you'll find the future land use map. The future land use map is the guiding land use policy for the city, and we also included some information about new housing types, which we call missing middle. Actually, they're not new, they're old housing types that often are created by the current development models. And then it also includes the zoning plan, so things that can be worked on to make the zoning ordinance more consistent with the future land use vision. The Connected Mobility Systems chapter includes the future transportation plan. So what are the key aspects and things that we want to do in the future transportation plan? Looking at citywide circulation, things like creating roundabouts, more exit ramps on 127, and rerouting of M20. Ideas, like I said, that have been around for a while, but were really reaffirmed when we worked with residents and stakeholders, including MDOT, at the charrette. Street typologies, so cross-sections for modifying streets in the city, retrofitting them to make them more walking and biking friendly, and then some ideas and strategies for innovative mobility. Things like retrofitting the transportation network for connected and autonomous vehicles, and reaffirming access management strategies that the city has been looking at as well. The Focus Redevelopment chapter has more ideas for the land redevelopment of some key areas in the city, including Mission Street, Pickard Street, downtown, and then reinforcing the connection between downtown and the university. Exceptional parks and public spaces. In this chapter, you'll find really the MDNR requirements for a parks and recreation plan. This is a plan that the city's also been managing, like the master plan. I think the value of doing this as part of the master plan is that the integration of public comments into the entire plan was something we looked to achieve. And we did hear a lot during the public process about the value of Mount Pleasant's great park system, including the need for connectivity through trails and increasing knowledge of the system. The final chapter, Innovative Services and Aspirations, includes an action plan for the goals and objectives of the plan, which we did craft during the charrette process and get public feedback on the goals. We also include in this chapter a fairly extensive summary of the public engagement. I think the value in this summary is that you can read it and really see firsthand what residents and participants said during that process. And we've even included quotes throughout it of some of the key things that we heard. And then finally in this chapter we've included the demographics analysis, which is another detailed summary of trends that affect citywide development. So I do want to highlight just some key things from each of the chapters. I mentioned the future land use map. The future land use map has been redeveloped to be or to align with the zoning ordinance, and particularly looking at creating mixed-use zones to correspond to the form-based code and to encourage development that is aligned with that. Of course, the other thing we looked at was creating missing middle housing. Some examples of the missing middle housing are duplexes, townhomes, live-work units, and bungalow courts. These types of things can be built on smaller parcels than traditional apartment complex type development, and they also integrate very well in more mixed development neighborhoods, including on the edges of single-family districts. And then I did mention the zoning plan earlier that talks about relating these new recommendations to the zoning ordinance. The Connected Mobility Systems chapter, I did mention it's got a few big ideas, roundabouts on Mission Street to allow for the pedestrianization of the corridor to support land use, but also maintain vehicle circulation and access to the campus. This idea of creating more highway ramps, particularly at Broomfield from 127, that would relieve some of the traffic that currently is routed onto Mission Street. And again, the idea of rerouting M20 up to Pickard Street would relieve neighborhood traffic through the city and also some of the traffic on Mission Street. Again, these are ideas that have been included in the Mount Pleasant Master Plan for since the 1960s they were first thought of, and we really heard some very positive ideas about them in the plan. The Future Transportation Plan also creates or is focused around creating accessible neighborhood centers. The zoning code really created this idea of pedestrian sheds, so we wanted to reinforce that with the ideas represented in the Future Transportation Map, as well as in the development chapter, which is the next chapter. And then we looked at cross-sections for various corridors, mainly focusing on Mission Street, but also some of the key arterials in the city. I mentioned innovative mobility strategies, and then access management is an old idea, but there's a whole portion of Mission Street that the plan has designated as a retrofit corridor, which really means what we found in our analysis is that many of the buildings already currently are conforming with the new zoning ordinance, and with some minor interventions, that northern area of Mission Street could be made to function better for pedestrians, and that's included in the plan as well. The focus redevelopment chapter, I mentioned this idea of pedestrian sheds, but really the two big ones are a new one proposed in Mission Street on the south end, and of course downtown. But you see, these are on this map on the right is a map that shows pedestrian sheds. Even a half-mile pedestrian shed at each of those areas really isn't enough to capture the whole city. So we also looked at neighborhood centers to be encouraged through the future land use and future transportation map. But we did look at specific areas as models for retrofitting for walkability, as well as implementing the zoning standards. The Mission Street area, the preferred plan for Mission Street was to create conforming buildings along the street core, which is essentially requires a zero lot line building and permits building up to 5 stories. Now that's a significant amount of economic development, and certainly that development is worthy of some public investment. And so that's what the corridor is looking at, what types of public investment could be done in partnership with MDOT to support the level of development that the city has permitted there through zoning. And we have some kind of bird's eye views which essentially look about using, creating a grid system and permitting infill housing, residential development, as well as larger commercial structures along Mission Street. Now this is a long-term plan. I mean, you're looking at a 30-year vision, maybe a 50-year vision. But like I said, if the master plan doesn't think big, we're pretty much guaranteed that it won't ever happen. So the idea is to establish a policy and then iteratively support it with decisions for land use planning, as well as establish a framework for partnering with CMU and MDOT to implement transformative change on the corridor through a corridor reconstruction project on the south half of the street, where we really do note that the land use pattern does not conform with the required zoning ordinance substantively like the northern half does. We looked at the town center. What we learned about the town center is that really downtown there was a strong desire to create a gathering space, a space that could be programmed flexibly and also maintains a little bit of parking but possibly doesn't prioritize to the extent that it does now. As opposed to a plan that created more vision for additional commercial uses as part of that development, this plan focuses on integrating into the Riverview apartment campus with some additional housing and really creating new downtown housing on the edge of the town center and bridging to the city city center campus or the City Hall campus. The other thing that was noted in this plan was the importance of making connections to Island Park via trails and a pedestrian bridge from downtown. And for the Pickard Street area, we looked at really creating a northern gateway to downtown, enhancing the northern gateway to downtown on Main Street, but also creating a buffer between the industrial area, which we really found people liked. We're very excited about maintaining some of the character to that area, but at the same time creating a bridge to the neighborhoods to the south. So there is a plan for what we would call one of these neighborhood centers or neighborhood walkable areas there that can be used as a model for other areas around the city. The final image in the plan in this chapter is this idea for creating a civic gazebo of sorts on the south end of downtown that would function as a terminal vista for coming up University and being able to see from almost all the way to campus where downtown was. And that connection, to let people know exactly how close downtown is, was thought of a way to really, through transportation and urban design, create a visual connection between the university and downtown. Chapter 4, Parks and Public Spaces. It covers all the requirements from MDNR, information on administration. One of the more interesting things about Parks Plan is it divides the parks into typologies. So how many neighborhood parks are there? How many mini parks? How many community parks? And then based on a city the size of Mount Pleasant, how much is needed? And the inventory explains what type of parks there are and provides information on each of those parks. And then, of course, there's a map that shows where the parks are located, as well as natural features, and then there's also a regional parks. The amenities that are included in each park are described in detail, as well as program features and the facility analysis and service area for each of the parks. One of the interesting things about the facility analysis is looking at both quarter mile and half mile walkability from the parks. You see that the city is very well covered and very well serviced by parks. There was some talking about the need to create more connection between the east and the west side, which of course is a goal, but even the east side is fairly well served by the facilities there. The Parks Plan will include a capital improvements plan. One of the things we, in talking with the city staff, want to add to this is kind of an unprogrammed capital improvement plan, so things that if we're able to do in the next 5 years would be included as well. So it's a wish list, but it's a wish list for things that we know residents are interested in and could potentially be funded by the state. Innovative services and aspirations, the final chapter of the plan. This includes the action plan that I mentioned. It identifies partners, a time frame, who could lead those strategies, and is included for each goal, and essentially there's a goal for each chapter of the plan. So the framework or logical structure is really divided by each of these books. And then in this book, it provides some guidance for overall implementation. I mentioned a lot about how successful the charrette was. We really, in addition to getting a lot of work done, I think everyone had a really good time, and we spent the week, digging deep and thinking about the city. But we wanted to supplement the information there for people who couldn't come and participate in person. We did basically do same program online. So all the information we asked for and talked about in person, we provide an opportunity for people to go online and to provide that information as well. And we did get more than 500 responses online, which is pretty good for this type of survey, and especially considering how many responses or people actually participated while we were here too. And then I mentioned the demographics. I don't want to do a complete demographics presentation tonight, but there is a lot of detail in the plan. I just wanted to mention that there's population analysis that looks at age factors, housing density, racial composition in the city, housing occupancy, as well as age of structures, value of structures, sometimes called tenure, housing tenure, economics, income data, occupation data. All this stuff is very important, and the master plan provides an opportunity to create a snapshot of that over time. So next steps, like I said, we're looking at the 70% draft. The 70% draft is online and available for residents to review or commissioners to review. At this time, we are looking for comments from the commissioners to go to your staff representative, as well as we're accepting comments from the Planning Commission, the DDA, and the Parks Commission as well through their staff members. And then the Mount Pleasant staff is reviewing the plan as well. What our intent is to do is to collect those comments with staff through November 15th. And then we plan to essentially issue a 100% draft that can be considered for adoption. Now let me kind of cover how that goes. So what happens with the master plan is the Planning Commission is the body that kind of is in charge of the process. They'll make a recommendation to the City Commission to distribute the plan for public comment. And what happens then is basically we will send out the plan and send out notice to all of the surrounding governmental units and government entities to basically say that the plan is ready to accept comments. And the public comment period is 63 days. Now we may do 90 days, we may do 100 days. We haven't decided that. But I think the important thing is that we get a draft that the city's happy with and start that process of collecting comments. Once that comment period is up, there needs to be a public hearing. And the public hearing for the master plan will be held at Planning Commission, but there also needs to be a public hearing held at the Parks Commission for the Parks Plan. So what we're going to do is basically take those parallels, since they're all a part of one document, and we'll go first to the Parks Commission with the entire document, the master plan, and the Parks Plan, which is the one document, and get them to make a recommendation. Then the public hearing after that will be held at Planning Commission, and then Planning Commission and Parks Commissions, their recommendations will come to the City Commission for adoption. And if we keep to the schedule, that will probably happen in spring of next year, and that is the schedule that we talked about at the beginning. So I'm certainly happy to say that we are on schedule. It's always a good thing for a project like this. And just to note that the Parks Plan, it does technically expire on March 1st, and that's when we'd need to have a new 5-year plan adopted. But your Parks Department doesn't really intend on applying for grants this year, so it's not like we're held to the fire, but it is always good to have a plan that's current. I think certainly we're meeting the intent of the requirement by working on the plan now. And, you know, if the Parks Department wants to apply for grants next year, I think we're in line for that. So that is my presentation. I kept it to 25 minutes, so that's pretty good for me. I went a little fast, but I'm happy to take questions and discuss it. So thank you.
Questions or comments for Paul? Pete?
Paul, you mentioned there's quite a few things dealing with Mission Street and Peckard Street here, which is in the MDOT jurisdiction. Where are we at with talks with MDOT, and have you taken these parts of that and given it to MDOT and getting feedback from their officials?
Well, we have had several meetings with MDOT as well as participation in the charrette. The concept of doing a roundabout is something that they were open to, but I think also certainly, I think I would say they were enthusiastic about working with the city on new ideas. So I think the goal of the master plan from the city's perspective is to establish a policy that they want to work with MDOT on. And I think that in the end will make it easier for MDOT to do work on the corridor too, because they'll be working on something that's endorsed by the city. I think certainly we've talked with staff about following up with additional meetings, but as I mentioned, a part of the process is to start that 63-day review when officially the plan would be released to MDOT for comment. But I think our plan is to continue to follow up with them about it. I was happy with their participation, and I think that we've got a good partnership going. I think the other part of that that's really important is the CMU aspect. So the plan that we're creating for Mission Street is conforming to CMU's campus plan. So it's not just MDOT that really, and MDOT does think that there needs to be work on Mission Street. The question is what type of work. So we're working not just with them, but with CMU to establish at least the city's preferred vision. And I think that they've expressed that they want to continue to work with the city on that.
Any other questions or comments for Paul? Commissioner Ling?
In the section on land use, there is a discussion about changes in, recommended changes for the zoning ordinance. And we had just updated the zoning ordinance a couple of years ago, and it was a lengthy process, and it was at points a very contentious process. And I have, perhaps when I've had a chance to look at more of the detail, I'll get a better idea of it. But the basic question I have is there anything fundamentally different in the recommendations? When I looked at the future land use plan as part of the master plan, it looked pretty similar in terms of the zoning to what we have now. I did notice, I think there were some subtle changes, some slight changes maybe on Main Street with some attached residential that I don't think had been originally in there. But I guess the overall question is there anything fundamentally different from what we had in the the zoning ordinance that we just adopted?
No, I don't think that there is. So I think one of the reasons why we did get, in my experience, I feel like we got a lot of consensus in the charrette process for the master plan. And I think that part of the reason why we were able to kind of all meet and kind of talk about the same ideas is because the city had gone through the zoning process so quickly. So a lot of the big ideas had kind of already been sorted out. And much of what the future land use plan presents is a vision that is consistent with and kind of modifying the city's land use plan to implement the zoning ordinance. The zoning plan is really designed to essentially explain the relationship between the future land use plan and the zoning ordinance, as well as identify, what I would call minor amendments. So anytime you do a full reboot on an entire citywide zoning ordinance, you're going to have amendments. And, truthfully, even if you don't do that, you have amendments. Hopefully, maybe a little more if you haven't recently done it, but I think that the concepts that are presented for the zoning plan are really kind of minor amendments, housekeeping, things that can be implemented, and maybe small improvements. But that is certainly one of the chapters that we're looking at closely with the city staff, just to make sure that we've got that list is concise and it's the most easiest to pursue for implementation. But small things. And I actually was during the charrette, I was happy to kind of hear how many people were behind and supportive of a vision that was aligned with the zoning ordinance. So,
Thank you. The other question I have, I guess, is more aimed towards next steps for both the Planning Commission and the City Commission, since there is a lot in here. And one of the things we had talked about was making sure that by the time we got to the final public hearings at the Planning Commission and the City Commission, there weren't a lot of surprises, that people knew exactly what was in it. So I wondered if there are any work sessions. This doesn't seem like the appropriate time to ask a lot of real specific questions. But will we at some point, do we have something scheduled where we would be looking at the specifics, maybe getting a little more explanation of some of the minor differences between the zoning ordinance and the master plan, or not?
We do not have anything scheduled at this time, but we could certainly look at the calendar to see how we could fit that in for you.
And certainly from the review, just in the review and what we're doing right now, I think it would certainly be appropriate for commissioners to note questions that they have, not only edits, but things that you would like explained to you or addressed, and submit those to staff by the 15th. Because what we'll do is, that would be a good indicator for, one, the types of changes we should make to kind of make that draft final, but two, the information that you'd be looking for us to explore as part of the release for public comment.
Thank you.
November 15th.
That's when we want your comments, so.
Okay.
Opening day of deer season.
Yeah.
I don't think I'm busy that day.
Do we have any more questions or comments for Paul before we let him go? Paul, thanks for coming, and we'll be in touch.
Yep, thank you so much for your time. It's been my pleasure to see everybody this evening.
Do we have any additions or deletions to the agenda tonight? Seeing none, I will open our first public input section. There are a few public hearings tonight, and so if you're here to talk about the neighborhood enterprise zone or the commercial facility exemption certificate concerning 410 West Broadway, we'll have a public hearing. And also, we have a few zoning amendments, and so we'll have public hearings for those. So you'll be able to speak at those public hearings, but if you want to speak now, that is your right. We also have other things on our agenda that you may want to speak about. So if you want to, you can come to the podium, state your name, your address, and you'll have 5 minutes to address the commission. Probably wait for the public hearing. Seeing no one coming forward, we will close this public input section. And Manager Ridley, would you like to go over the receipt of petitions and communications?
Yes, you obviously have a lot of these on your agenda tonight, but the first one you have is the report on pending items, and attached to that is the monthly report we've started to provide to you on the police-related citizen complaints. You have the June minutes of the Downtown Development Authority, the July and September minutes of the Parks and Recreation Commission, the August minutes of the Tax Increment Finance Authority, and the September minutes from the Planning Commission. Then for the correspondences that were received since the last meeting, you have two that are related to the zoning ordinance. The first one is from the Home Builders Association, and that letter was actually sent to City Planner Jacob Kane, but they requested that we provide it in the City Commission packet, which we did. And you'll notice in their letter, they're recommending that you consider creating a task force, and they indicated that they would provide their top 5 priorities of items for the task force to address. As of today, we still have not received those top 5 priorities. So our recommendation at this point is that you hold off on any discussions about that possibility of a task force until you see what that list might be. The second letter related to the zoning ordinance was received from Doug LaBelle, and it included information from other property owners within the city as well. And as you know, that communication was fairly lengthy and included a number of items in it. Some of which we've heard concerns about before, but some of which are brand new items that had just come up. So because of the breadth of those issues, we'll provide you with some written information about some of those issues at your next meeting. The next two communications have to do with communications that were received regarding the census. One was from Emily Krusch and one was from Alexander Giles. And Mr. Giles' communication actually went directly to Commissioner Kulik, but he requested that it be provided to all of you. And both of these communications will be shared with our Isabella County Advisory Census Committee, as well as our internal committee, to make sure that we look at some of the suggestions that both of those individuals had in their letters. And then the next correspondence was from Martha Riggs regarding her thoughts about the election of the mayor. And then there was a communication from Doug Rustin regarding concerns with what he was charged for an oil change at a local business. And he's talked to some staff at the city about that, feeling like the city should have some enforcement capability over that type of an issue, but we currently don't at this time. It's really a business issue that we've encouraged him to talk to the manager or corporate headquarters or maybe the Better Business Bureau about. And then the next communication is from Doug Janes regarding some stormwater concerns for his properties at Preston and Flynn Lane. And we are doing a little bit more looking into some of the issues that he had at those properties, and we'll be getting back to him. And then you have the report from the Michigan Municipal League's executive director about the status of Michigan Municipal League activity, and two resignations that have been referred to the property, or for the appointments committee, one from Rick Routinen from the City CMU Liaison Committee, and one from Desiree Woodworth from the Isabella County Material Recovery Facility.
Thank you. Next on our agenda are the consent calendar items. Consent calendar items are items on the agenda with an asterisk next to them. Are there any items that need to be removed from the consent calendar this evening? Seeing none, Manager Ridley.
Yes, the first item on the consent calendar is approval of the minutes of your regular meeting and closed session of September 23rd, as well as your special meeting of September 29th. Next, we're suggesting that you set a public hearing on the referral of an ordinance from the Planning Commission. And you'll recall earlier this year, you referred an ordinance to the Planning Commission that would address the zoning regulations for potential recreational marijuana establishments. And those regulations were consistent with what was put in place for medical marijuana facilities. So the Planning Commission reviewed the proposed ordinance, corrected a couple references where medical was referred to instead of recreational. They held their required public hearing, and now they're recommending it to you for approval. So we're recommending you set a public hearing for November 11th. The next item has to do with fireworks, and you'll recall last year at the end of the Christmas parade, the Bird Bar and Grill and the Bridenstine family sponsored community fireworks, and it was so popular that we've received requests from individuals to replicate it this year. And fortunately for us, WCFX has agreed to help with donating funds to maybe be able to pull that off again this year. And the proposed date for it is at the end of the Christmas parade, which is December 7th. And that's not a date that is allowed for fireworks under state law unless you take action to allow it to occur on that date. So we're recommending that you approve the December 7th date and authorize the Public Safety Director to work with the state on the proper approvals. And I would point out that we won't sign the contract with Wolverine Fireworks Display until we have commitments from WCFX that the full $10,000 in donations has been received. But this would at least allow us to start working out the details with the state on getting the approval for the date. And the next item on the consent calendar is the appointment of a city commissioner to the study committee for the Recreational Authority. You'll recall you approved a resolution back in August to agree to be part of that study committee, and the Union Township Board of Trustees has also approved it, and the Mount Pleasant Public School Board has. So that group is ready to start having their meetings. And the resolution on behalf of the city named the city manager as one of our representatives, and then said that there would be a city commissioner appointed by the mayor. And under our charter, the ad hoc committees can be appointed by the mayor on his own, and so he's appointing himself to that study committee. And then lastly is the approval of payrolls and warrants.
Commissioner Kulik,
Move to approve the consent calendar as presented.
Commissioner Perschbacher.
So moved. Second.
Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of approving the consent calendar, please vote by saying aye.
Aye.
And those opposed, the same. That is unanimous. Next on our agenda is the first of our public hearings. This is item number 19, which is a public hearing on an application for a neighborhood enterprise zone certificate for the property at 410 West Broadway, and to consider approval of the same. Manager Ridley, would you like to introduce us?
Yes, I'm going to make my comments on both of the public hearings regarding 410 West Broadway, although you're required to hold two separate public hearings and take two separate actions on the requests before you. My comments will cover material that's related to both of those. And as you know, both of these requests for a tax abatement are for the mixed-use development that is part of the contract that was agreed to with Michigan Community Capital for 410 West Broadway. You may recall that the very original agreement that was approved early in 2018 anticipated that the tax abatement request would be for 100% of the abatement of the taxes. And later, as the project was better developed and we got more details of it, we learned that the components of the project only qualify for a 50% tax abatement. So the City Commission approved the contract with Michigan Community Capital, which includes a commitment to approve the two tax abatements. So after holding the public hearing on both of those this evening, the Commission considered the resolutions as presented. But in summary, what they would do is the neighborhood enterprise zone is for the residential portion of the project only and would be for a 50% abatement of taxes for the first 15 years. The commercial redevelopment district is for the first floor or the commercial portion of the development and would be for 50% for only 12 years. We've estimated that the value of those abatements over the first 15 years equates to approximately $1.2 million across all units of government, of which the city taxes are approximately $340,000 over those 15 years. But also during those 15 years, the taxes that will actually be collected and distributed to the units of government amount to $1.5 million, of which the city receives just over $401,000. This development meets the preferred development as was outlined by the joint meeting of the City Commission and the Economic Development Corporation in early 2018 by including a residential component, and it also retains a grocery store downtown. It's also consistent with the number of goals that are in our current master plan and our economic development plan. So after holding the public hearing, we recommend you approve both of the resolutions as presented.
Thank you, Manager Ridley. I'll now open the public comment or the public hearing. If you wish to speak, please come to the podium, state your name, and you'll have 5 minutes to address the commission.
Hi, my name is Marilyn Crowley. I'm the Vice President of Investment with Michigan Community Capital, the developer for this project. I just wanted to come give y'all an update on where we are. So the project is moving forward. It is not still in planning or review of feasibility. We are definitely moving forward with this project pending your support. So we're in the stage where we're finishing our construction drawings and we'll be bidding the project out next month. We're starting closing calls with our lenders next week, and we're taking this to our board for approval of the equity component next month. So pending your support tonight, we'll be able to close and purchase the land in December per our amended agreement, and should be able to start construction as early as March if the weather is cooperative. So we're, all the funding pieces are coming into place, and we're really excited about the project. We even started picking out like apartment finishes last week. So we're really excited about moving forward, and we appreciate y'all's support.
Thank you. Seeing no one else approaching the podium, I will close this public hearing. Commissioner Kulik.
Move to approve the resolution approving the Neighborhood Enterprise Zone Certificate for Michigan Community Capital as presented. We have to do these as two separate ones, right? Yep, okay.
Commissioner Ling.
Second.
Discussion. Commissioner Kulik.
I'm glad the project is moving along. I would certainly love to see a project like this take place without the abatements, but I think that's beyond anybody's dream of it actually happening. It doesn't happen in Mount Pleasant. It doesn't happen anywhere in the state, projects of this sort being built without the support of the community and the incentives that are needed to fund it. I will be voting yes for this.
Vice Mayor Gills.
I have watched this parcel be vacant for almost my entire lifetime, and I was witness to the 2005 agreement with J.E. Johnson that fell through because of the housing crisis. I do believe we will be having another housing crisis in the near future with a recession. I would hope to see that this development get on its legs before then, and hope we do not see a change in the agreement of what it will be used for. Deed restrictions have been put in place to make sure that it doesn't revert to a low-income housing. I have nothing against low-income housing. I just believe that is a beautiful piece of prime riverfront property that we are selling for $65,000. Commissioners have decided that we needed to fill the missing middle. Looking at the census data from the master plans presenter, our population since year 2000 has decreased by 305 people. So over 18 years, we have lost 305 people from our population, and we all are aware of CMU's declining enrollment, unfortunately. I do not see a big industry coming to town with a lot of good paying jobs where this missing middle housing would be taken up by these new people, these new professionals that are coming to town that cannot find a place to live. With the declining enrollment, I know there are houses that are, and apartments that are not being filled, houses that could possibly be converted to single-family homes if there no longer is a student rental population, the high student rental population. We are experiencing some vacancies. My vision for Parcel B, there was a couple visions I had. Amphitheater was one, because I thought that would be an awesome place for the amphitheater. And I also think we need a hotel close to downtown. With the A2 to TC train that will be coming, probably within our this decade, that piece of property would be the perfect place for a hotel to get passengers off this tour train to then now visit downtown, shuttle out to the casino, or go other, and being in range of all our parks. They could bring their bikes on the trains, they could unload, they could use their bike to get around our parks. If a hotel was sitting next door, it would be a constant stream of new people to tour our downtown and our city. Unfortunately, the majority of the commission believe that we do have a missing middle housing crisis. With no new business that actually brings in those types of salaries for rents that range from $700 to $1,100. I don't believe that we should be subsidizing this type of development on taxpayer dime. I don't, even when MEDC and Lansing is giving monies for some of the complications on the site for infrastructure movements, the electrical lines being buried, lift station needs to be moved. Those monies are taxpayer money. So the money you send to the state through income tax, through our taxes for gas and such, are being funneled again into the development. So this is very much being paid by your taxpayer dollars. And so I would hope that it does come to fruition that we have 48 apartments that are filled and not vacant. I am just very disturbed that we're using so many abatements and so much taxpayer dollars to make it happen. We've had several letters in our packets this evening from developers that don't want to be told how to develop their properties, what kind of driveways to put on, what kind of pitches to put on their roofs, what kind of parking to do. But it seems like developers are the first people in line to stand in line for a handout under the taxpayers subsidizing it. So I find that quite ironic. But I will be voting no on this.
Commissioner Ling.
I will be voting yes on it. I think with any project, there's always risks and unknowns about what's going to happen in the future. But I think that this is a project that meets what the community has indicated a number of different times is what they want for downtown. And as the city manager said, it is exactly what the joint meeting of the Economic Development Commission and the City Commission, when we got together in the spring of 2018 and looked at what is the best way to move forward on this property. And this type of a project was exactly with retail on the bottom, in this case a grocery store, which I think will be a great asset to downtown, and housing for the missing middle, which I know that there are areas of disagreement on the commission. I think that all of the studies that we've had done, and frankly my own personal experience has been that we have a missing type of housing. And I don't think we necessarily need to be building new industry in order to have people looking for those apartments. I think there are people now, people who work at the university, people who commute in from Lansing, for example, or Midland, because they weren't able to find the kind of apartments that they were looking for in Mount Pleasant. So I do think, time will tell what happens, but I do think that is there. It does involve tax abatements, but the bottom line is it involves the city receiving tax revenue over the next 15 years of over $400,000, and the units of government as a whole, the county and other units of government, receiving $1.5 million over the next 15 years, and we've received nothing for decades. So I think it's a win-win all the way around, and I will be supporting it.
Seeing no other comment, Commissioner Toles.
I will not be supporting this tonight for the reasons that we reduced the property from $300,000 down to $65,000. There's going to be a $700,000 grant to move the lift stations back across the street where they once were, burying the underground utilities, moving the storm sewer. And I read in there that Green Tree, the cost of building in that 10,000 square foot is $3 million. I find that really hard to believe. It's going to take $3 million to do a 10,000 foot square grocery store. If you look at the revenue that needs to be taken in on a grocery store, it's about $280 a square foot. That means that store would have to take $2.8 million at a break-even point in sales in order to make any money. You're working on a 4 to 6% margin. I don't think it can be done. And they're trying to raise money right now, and I don't even know if they raised their $1 million by the end of September. I don't think they did. Last time I looked, it was right around $200,000. And the developer from MCC was saying this is his big anchor. If the store doesn't go, the project's not going to go. I mean, how can you be a year and a half into a deal and the developer doesn't know if he's got his anchor locked in yet? And as far as the DEQ, I haven't seen the reports yet. The developer or somebody mentioned that the property's contaminated. I haven't seen anything yet. So are they going to be back here now and then asking for a grant to take care of the contamination? There's just a lot of open-ended items, and I will not be supporting it.
Manager Ridley, could you answer the question that, does Green Tree Cooperative Grocery have a deal signed with Michigan Community Capital?
I think that question would be better answered potentially by Marilyn Crowley as far, because we don't know all the details of that. So if you're looking for an answer to that, I would suggest we see if Marilyn could answer that for us.
Marilyn, if you don't mind.
Hi, we do have a letter of interest executed with Green Tree, and we're in the final stages of negotiation on their lease. So there's nothing that has gone forward to indicate that they will not be our tenant. Just a little bit of clarification, the cost of their build-out is anticipated to be $1 million that Michigan Community Capital is funding. So the money that Green Tree is raising, I believe, is mostly for inventory and working capital. So we already have the funds in place to fund their build-out. Should I stay up here in case y'all have any other questions?
I think that answers the question.
I have a question. So you are financing the build-out of the white box commercial, the $1 million to make sure that they have grocery freezers and coolers, commercial grade.
As part of their lease, we've provided a tenant improvement allowance, which is typical for commercial spaces. It is also very important to us that Green Tree is a viable tenant. So we've been reviewing their financials kind of constantly. And then they're also under review by third-party consultants that are making sure. A main source of our funding is new market tax credits, and it's a very robust review. So all of our financials and Green Tree's financials have been under review by those folks. So we feel pretty confident that Green Tree is going to be a viable candidate. And in terms of their fundraising, I believe haven't reached their deadline. So I think they're still on track for reaching their fundraising goal.
Thank you, Marilyn.
You're welcome.
I just
Seeing,
want to make one more comment. It's ironic they're able to finance $1 million for the build-out of a commercial first floor, yet they're asking Mount Pleasant for tax abatements for 12 years and then 15 years.
I'd like to call the question.
question has been called. I think we'll proceed to a vote. All those in favor of the motion, please vote by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. And those opposed, the same.
Nay.
Aye.
So that passes 4-2. Next on our agenda is a public hearing on the application for a commercial facility exemption certificate for the property at 410 West Broadway, and to consider approval of the same. If you'd like to make comment, I'm going to now open the public hearing. You can come to the podium, state your name, your address, and you have 5 minutes to address the commission. Seeing no one come forward, I'll now close the public hearing. Commissioner Ling.
I move to approve the resolution approving the commercial facilities exemption certificate under Public Act 255 of 1978 as amended for the Michigan Community Capital as presented.
Commissioner Kulik.
Second.
Discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion, please vote by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. And those opposed, the same.
Nay.
So that motion passes 4-2. Our next public hearing is a public hearing on recommended rezoning request for the McGurk subdivision lots 1 through 10 from CD3 to CD4 with a residential dwelling use only special requirement and consider approval of the same. Manager Ridley, would you like to introduce us?
Yes, this is being recommended to you by the Planning Commission. It was recommended unanimously, and the lots in that area already have a deed restriction that applied to the parcels, which require the construction of duplexes. So by rezoning to the CD4 with the residential overlay, it would eliminate the extra step of having to go through the special use process as construction occurs. So the Planning Commission has recommended that you make this rezoning change to CD4 with the residential dwelling use overlay.
I will now open the public hearing, and format is the same. Your name, your address, and 5 minutes.
My name's Pat McGurk Jr. Myself and my father built the subdivision in 1980, and it was set up for duplexes. Heidi Court right behind it's all duplexes, and back then the square footage was larger, 9,800 square foot versus 88 now, and it's all set up for that. With the zoning change where you have to have a owner occupied in one spot and maintain that, there's no call for those. There's no interest whatsoever. And to try to resell something like that with that stipulation, nobody's going to want to go in there either. Duplexes are kind of a stepping stone for young individuals to live in one half, rent the other half out. When they save up some money, they can rent the other half out and build their house. And that's what I did. Two of them, that's what I did over there. And I'd like you to give consideration to do this so that possibly we could market the duplexes over there. So, have any questions? Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no one else come forward, we'll close the public hearing. Commissioner Kulik.
Move to adopt the ordinance to amend the zoning map of Chapter 154, zoning ordinance of the Code of Ordinances, to rezone the property from CD3 to suburban to CD4 general urban with a residential dwelling use only special requirement for McGurk subdivision lots 1 through 10.
Commissioner Tolas.
Support.
Commissioner Kulik.
These duplexes that have been built in this subdivision in the past are some of the best duplexes in the city. They've been built over time, and the McGurk family that's been developing them have kept up with the changes that people are looking for. So the first duplexes that were built were smaller, and as time's gone on, they've gotten bigger, better amenities in them and things of that sort. So I will be supporting this.
Commissioner Tolas.
I will also be supporting this tonight. It was implemented way before the ordinance had changed. The property's deed restricted, and it conforms to the existing area, and I will be supporting it.
Seeing no other discussion, all those in favor, please vote by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. And those opposed, the same. That passes unanimously. Our next public hearing is on a recommended text change to section 154.411C. I think I added an extra one. This is the trash receptacle requirement to regulate recycling receptacle requirements and to consider approval of the same. Manager Ridley, would you like to introduce this topic?
Yes, again, this was recommended unanimously by the Planning Commission, and it would require the provision of both trash and recycling receptacles for new developments.
I will now open the public hearing. Seeing no one come forward, I will close the public hearing. Commissioner Kulik.
Move to adopt the ordinance to amend section 154.411 to regulate recycling receptacle requirements as presented.
Vice Mayor Gillis.
Second.
Discussion? I would just like to say that our community has made a commitment to being, to having a more sustainable culture and in being environmental friendly. And I think this is policy that moves us towards that goal. So I'll be supporting it. Seeing no other discussion, all those in favor, please vote by saying aye.
Aye.
And oppose the same. That is unanimous. Our next public hearing is on the recommended text change to section 154.412 to permit stacked parking under certain limited circumstances and to consider approval of the same. Manager Ridley?
This one, again, is recommended by the Planning Commission. This one was not unanimous. It was on an 8-to-1 vote. But what this would allow is for stacked parking when the areas are accessed only by a rear alley or rear lane, or it would also allow a limited amount of stacked parking if there's a house that's used for non-residential or mixed-use purposes. So after holding the public hearing, we recommend you approve it as recommended by the Planning Commission.
I will now open the public hearing. Seeing no one come forward, I'll close the public hearing. Commissioner Kulik.
Move to adopt the ordinance as presented to amend text section 154.412, parking, loading, driveway, service, storage, drive-through, trash, receptacle, dumpster equipment, and other items located and standards to permit stacked parking under certain limited circumstances.
Vice Mayor Gillis.
Second.
Commissioner Kulik.
I generally don't like stacked parking, especially in rental properties. You've got the problem that you pull in first, I pull in second. You need to go when I'm asleep or I've gotten a ride someplace with somebody else and all of a sudden you're blocked in. I will be supporting this. I would like to have seen a requirement that the leases of properties that have stacked parking specifically have a section in the lease that specifies that parking will be stacked, and there's a chance you might get stuck there for a while, but I'm willing to give it a chance.
Seeing no other discussion, all those in favor, please vote by saying aye.
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 And those opposed, the same. Unanimous. Our last public hearing for the evening is a text change to table 154.405A to update standards for walls and fencing, roof pitch, and driveways, and to consider approval of the same. Manager Ridley?
This again is recommended to you by the Planning Commission, and this one was unanimous. And this zoning change actually accomplishes 3 things, 2 of which you referred to the Planning Commission to look at based on input that you had received. So the 2 that you asked them to look at would be the requirements for the roof pitch. And so the current minimum in the zoning ordinance is for an 812, and this recommended change changes that to a 612. And the other change that you asked them to look at was the driveway width at the front footage, which currently is at 10 feet, and this would change it back to 18 feet at the front footage line. And then the third change that is part of this zoning amendment would increase the side yard fence from 6 feet from 4 feet. And this was previously amended in 2015 and was not incorporated into this zoning ordinance. So it would bring it to be consistent with what was amended in 2015. So after holding the public hearing, we recommend you approve this ordinance as recommended, or this zoning amendment as recommended by the Planning Commission, which includes those 3 changes.
I will now open the public hearing.
I'm Mike Tennyson, 3942 East River Road. My wife and I own Howling Hammer Builders in Mount Pleasant. I've been building houses and remodeling in Mount Pleasant for
41 years now. I was on the original Project 2000 and was the vision for the East Point and the Abbey subdivisions in Mount Pleasant. I'm speaking in regards to the roof pitch aspect of the zoning ordinance, and that we have other issues with it as well, but that's what this one is involved with. There's two things I think we need to look at here. One is affordability. The higher the roof pitch that you get, the more expensive that it is, both in materials and labor. When you go to an 812 roof pitch, which is what it is right now, a roofer can't walk that roof. It has to be scaffolded. 612 roof pitch you can usually walk. But I think the affordability issue also affects organizations like Habitat, and all the roof pitches are basically 412 pitches. So there's definitely an affordability issue in it, and we are really struggling with housing affordability all over the country. I'm almost embarrassed as a builder as to what a new house costs today, whether it's a starter house, and I built starter houses and I built $1 million houses, so you know, I've kind of seen it all. The other thing is design. I'm not sure why the city thinks that they have to be into the design of this. I pulled 3 renderings of houses that we actually built eventually, and I'll let you guys look at them. None of these houses could be built under this ordinance, right, the way that it sits right now, and they couldn't be built if you had a 612 pitch. I drove around the city of Mount Pleasant, and except for the old town center of the older houses in town, if you go through the subdivisions, I would say that 70% of the houses that have been built in the last 50 years in Mount Pleasant will not qualify under the new zoning ordinance. And I don't think that's right. I will take definite responsibility for this, and probably our home builders too. I mean, when we were going through this, I'm sure you had public hearings on the ordinance and everything else. The emphasis, all we heard was the rental side of it. So this stuff was in the ordinance, and we didn't catch it. That's our fault. And we wouldn't probably be here today if we had caught this and actually, you know, spoke at that time. So if you do set up a task force, I'll certainly be involved in it with the home builders. I think we need to get some of this stuff fixed because like I said, it has to do with affordability and it has to do with design. I truly believe that there should be no requirement for roof pitch. I don't think it should be 612. I think there's all houses all over town, and all of those pictures are 412 or less, and you can make them look very nice. There was a time when I wouldn't recommend anybody build a low-pitch roof house, but now we have steel roofs and other things that make them very feasible. And I think all those houses are extremely nice looking, and we could definitely have them in the city of Mount Pleasant. So I appreciate your consideration. If you have any questions, and I'd be glad to work with it if you set up with a task force on it, but I think we need to take care of some of these things. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no one else come forward, I will close the public hearing. Commissioner Kulik.
Move to adopt the ordinance amending Table 154.405A District Standards to modify the standards for fences and walls and roof pitch and driveway in the CD3L and CD3 districts as presented.
Vice Mayor Gillis.
Second.
Discussion? Commissioner Kulik.
I would just urge Mr. Tennyson to get that list from the home builder so that we can actually see what's on the list and get a task force and not go into it blind.
The roof pitch is probably one of the top ones in the garages and the other things that have brought up.
Yeah, but just get them on a list and get them to Nancy so that we can.
And I'll have to spearhead it. I was at the state meeting when they discussed that.
Okay.
Commissioner Toles.
I'm kind of torn on this right now. We've been going over these amendments for almost 2 years now, and we're just piecemealing it out all the time. I can see the fence. I can see the driveways going from 10 to 18, which is a no-brainer. But I don't know how we can require somebody to do a roof pitch when the state code does not even require a roof pitch. It requires the materials that are put under the roof on your pitch. It just doesn't make sense to me. And I think you're adding at least a $10,000 cost on the price of doing the house in order to do this pitch. You can go all the way down to a 312 pitch in the code book, under the state code book, but they're not requiring you to do an 812 or a 612 or a 412. The only thing that it requires the materials that have to be put under that for each additional pitch that you're going to choose. I just think this is ridiculous, and I think it should be all handled at one time. Get the task force, get the list, and take care of it at one time, instead of piecemealing it out.
I'd just like to say that expecting the approval of this amendment and the others tonight, I think that the city has done a really good job. Our appointed officials, our staff, and this body into really being receptive to the criticisms and the changes that people have really requested to be made to the zoning ordinance. I know that there was certainly a divisive conversation last year when it was passed, and there's been frustration over things that people have not liked. But I'm proud that the city hasn't turned its back and said, hey, we're not going to listen to you. I think we're doing the opposite. We're saying, if you have problems, come to us, and we're reasonably making changes that we think are good for the community and good for the people trying to do business here. So I'll be in support of this, and I look forward to having a continuing conversation about our zoning ordinance in the months and year to come. Commissioner Kulik.
If we could have adopted a perfect zoning ordinance, we would have. Nobody in the state, nobody in the world has done that. They're a dynamic document. As, you know, I don't remember how many pages it is, but to have as few changes and as minor as the changes are that we've done, I thought we did a pretty good job with it. Like I said, I'll be supporting this.
Seeing no other discussion, all those in favor, please vote by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. And those opposed?
Aye.
So that passes 5-1. Next on our agenda is item number 28, which is to consider approval of Make It Mount Pleasant program information and agreement with Lake Trust Credit Union. Manager Ridley, would you like to introduce us?
Yes, over the last couple of years, the downtown boards have discussed the possibility of a rent subsidy program for new businesses in the downtown. And earlier this year, staff was contacted by Lake Trust Credit Union, who had an interest in funding such a program for downtown Mount Pleasant. And it's similar to a program that they've funded in Howell, Michigan as well. And so under this proposed program, Lake Trust Credit Union would provide the funding for subsidies for 2 new or expanded businesses in the downtown for 1 year for a portion of their rent. And the subsidy is at a higher amount in the first months and then decreases over the 12 months of the rent subsidy. So the commitment from the city includes talking to businesses about the program, administering the program, and also there's a provision in there about the potential of waiving fees for building permits, sign permits, or outdoor dining or merchandise for the 2 businesses that might successfully be in the program. So the Downtown Tifa Board has reviewed the guidelines for the program and they've recommended approval. So the action we're asking for you tonight is to approve the program guidelines and authorize the mayor to sign the agreement with Lake Trust for the funding of the rent subsidies, and all of the materials have been reviewed by the city attorney.
Commissioner Kulik.
Move to approve.
Commissioner Perschbacher.
Second.
Commissioner Kulik.
One of the outreaches I would hope we would make would be to try to market it through the CMURC and their entrepreneurial program, that it would be perhaps a good incentive for a startup business to know that they can get some rent subsidies, and we can hopefully get those new businesses in our downtown and they can grow and flourish.
Vice Mayor Gillis.
When I first read this proposal from Lake Trust Credit Union, I asked what the gimmick was, because I couldn't imagine a bank giving up money to help someone establish or expand their business. I do have concerns about waiving our permits, building permits and sign permits, outdoor merchandise and outdoor dining permits. I have a problem with a bank creating such a program and then tying our hands, saying that the applicants of this program, that we cannot charge them what we would charge our homeowners, our builders, and our businesses here in Mount Pleasant. We do not have any other avenue for anyone else to get a free card for building permits. So as we looked last year and also 2 years ago on making sure that our residents pay for time and staff services that we provide, increased rental inspections, increase our water every year, increase our recycling, our tag and bags, to make sure that we are not subsidizing as taxpayers services. This is exactly what we are doing with this program, allowing them not to have to pay for building permits, sign permits, outdoor merchandise, and outdoor dining permits. So for this reason alone, I will be voting no.
I'd like to offer an amendment. The program benefits waives the city fees of up to $2,500 in the program, such as building, sign, outdoor merchandise, and outdoor dining permits. We could make I'd like to make an amendment that the TIFA covers those fees out of the $80,000 that we have allocated for them. That we allocated for the budget. Commissioner Ling?
I'll second that.
Commissioner Kulik?
Nancy, what about that?
Typically, that one's a tough one because you allocated $80,000 to the TIFA board and asked them to make recommendations for you about the best use of those funds to encourage economic development. And they're working on that recommendation, but they haven't made an actual recommendation to you. So certainly it's your budget dollars that you've given to them. I'm just not sure if you allocate those monies for them without their input, I'm not sure what that does to the work they've been doing about the best use of those funds. I would consider that what you might want to think about is funding those from the economic initiative funds that you have set aside instead, because you have funds set aside to encourage economic development, and that might be an easier, more expedient way to fund those so that the general fund still gets their dollars, but it comes out of the economic initiative funds instead of the TIFA funds, would be something I would ask you to consider. And then I would also comment that I'm not sure that Lake Trust required that to be a part of the program. I think they recommended it because they've seen it be successful in other programs and seen it to be a standard thing. But if you decide that you're not interested in that, we could ask Michelle, but I'm not sure that Lake Trust would pull their funding if that were not part of it. Is that true, Michelle? Would they pull their funding if we didn't do that part? Yeah. So it really is your decision about it, but so you can either discuss your amendment from Tifa, which may create some difficulties with some of the work they've already done. You could consider from the Economic Initiative Fund, or you could approve the program guidelines without that waiver of fees in there, recognizing that most successful programs typically do have that in their programs.
Commissioner Kulik.
Would you consider changing that to the Economic Initiative Fund rather than the Tifa Fund?
Yes.
How do we want to handle this parliamentary? Do you want to just change your motion and see if you still have support, or?
I'd like to ask Jeremy if,
Probably easiest, you can just withdraw your motion and then just make a new motion.
okay. I will withdraw my amendment and make a new motion that the city fees that the agreement stipulates could be waived are taken from the Economic Initiatives Fund.
Up to the $2,500, right?
Right. I would need a second for that
I'll
motion.
second that.
Commissioner Kulik seconds. Discussion? Commissioner Ling.
I think that's an appropriate way. In fact, I had thought myself about the Economic Initiative Fund as a way to subsidize it. That's the purpose of that fund. The purpose of the fund is to try to bring about economic development. And I think that it's good to hear that the Lake Trust doesn't require it, but I think that the fact that they've had experience with other cities where doing that is another way to ensure that you get some takers on it. And we've had a number of programs in the past where we haven't necessarily had takers. So I think developing a program that is helpful for the new businesses and that potentially is going to result in some new businesses downtown will be beneficial and the purpose of that economic incentive fund. So I think that's a reasonable way to indicate that the city is willing to also do its part along with Lake Trust.
I just want to add, so I offered my original amendment because the purpose of the Tifa board is to increase taxable value in their district, and so I thought that obviously helping new businesses to grow helps that tax base, and that it was a proper, that would be a proper use of that money, and obviously the Economic Initiatives Fund serves a similar purpose, and probably for sake of diplomacy and simplicity, is probably a better allocation, so. Commissioner Kulik.
There would be nothing to prevent the Tifa board or the downtown board or whoever to, one of the recommendations they come back to us, maybe they want to match what Lake Credit Union is doing or something else to encourage new businesses downtown. Obviously, what we've been trying in the past hasn't worked, so maybe something new will work.
Seeing no other discussion, all those in favor of the motion as amended, please vote by saying aye.
You vote on the amendment first.
Amendment first.
Still got to vote on the amendment.
Oh, that's right. All those in favor of the amendment, please vote by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. And those opposed, the same.
Aye.
So that passes 5-1. Now over to the original motion as amended. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please vote by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. And those opposed, the same.
Aye.
So that passes 5-1. Okay. Item number 29 is to consider authorizing an amendment to the contract between the city and Consumers Energy for rate decreases at the water treatment plant and distribution system. Manager Ridley.
Yes, we recently met with some of the city staff, met with Consumers Energy staff, and reviewed some of our current contracts with Consumers Energy. And Consumers Energy pointed out that at the water plant and at the distribution area at the Ranny Well, that we would actually be better served by a time of use contract instead of the standard demand rate contract that we're currently under. So it's estimating that by switching to this time of use contract, that we could save approximately $17,000 for the water fund. And in this case, we wouldn't have to make any changes to our operations in order for that to happen. And when I talked to the mayor and vice mayor about it, I incorrectly said we would be changing our operations, but I later learned we wouldn't have to change any of our operations to take advantage of it. It's just a different rate contract that we would be under. So we recommend that the mayor and clerk, that you authorize the mayor and clerk to sign the contracts for each of those facilities. And then I would mention that we continue to work with consumers about some other contracts that may be of benefit to us that would have to do with our commitment to potentially going to our generator backups on some peak days. And if we made a commitment to do that on some of their peak days, they would give us a rate adjustment for the entire year for that commitment, because that way they don't have to plan as much on those peak days. So that one is still in process, and that would change some of our operations that we do, so that's why I was confused by it. I apologize. But those contracts will come to you at a future meeting. This one is really just about our existing operations would be the same. We would just be under a time of use contract. So we recommend approval of it.
Commissioner Kulik.
Move to authorize the amendment to the contract.
Vice Mayor Gillis.
Second.
Discussion? I just want to say I'm really excited that we're going to save $17,000, and I'm sure Jamie Hockmeyer is going to be really happy about that as well. So, Commissioner Kulik.
It always impresses me how staff is looking out for the best interests of the city. They're finding things like this with Consumers Power and bringing it to us so that we can save money and provide better services and forestall rate increases in the future. So good job, staff.
All those in favor, please vote by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. And those opposed, the same. It's unanimous. Next on our agenda is announcements on city-related issues and new business. Commissioner Kulik.
Two things, and I'll pass it along. John, if you can remind us on leaf pickup again. And Nancy or Paul, if you would tell us about Halloween and the trick-or-treat hours.
You want me to start? Then you guys can correct me if I'm wrong. Leaf pickup starts, we ask people to rake into the streets starting Monday, October 21st. Our first week of pickup will be October 28th, and then it's every week after that, every other week after that. Halloween is on October 31st. Trick-or-treating is on October 31st from 6 to 8 in the city.
Thank you.
Anything to add, gentlemen?
Commissioner Tolis.
I would like to clarify a couple items from the MCC rep that was here. I passed out a brochure from Green Tree, which is states in there that it's $2 million for the build-out and fixtures and $1 million for advertising and operation expenses. So I don't know what she's talking about. She doesn't even know what her tenant's going to spend. And we've been told, first there was a letter of intent, then we were told there's a signed lease agreement. Which one is it? Now she's saying it, they only have a letter of intent. Letter of intent means nothing. Means absolutely nothing.
Just like to keep our new business and announcements to things that are moving forward. Vice Mayor Gillis.
Want to reach out to community members that might have some interest of serving on one of our committees. Application is available at mountpleasant.org. Right now we have a Parks and Rec vacancy, but we will be having some turnover before the end of the year. Some terms will be expiring. I doubt that everyone will stay. They can, but there should be some openings, so please look over that document with all the committees and see if there's something that interests you. I also want to let you know that ballots are available, absentee ballots, here at City Hall. So in case you're not going to be able to make it out November 5th to vote with the rest of us, you can come to City Hall to get your absentee ballot. And please be informed voters. Vote411.org will give you a sample ballot and also answers to questions from our city commission candidates. We also have a video supplied by the League of Women Voters, where the 5 candidates were here at City Hall and answered questions from our community members. So please search those out and check out their responses to the questions. And also the Morning Sun did an article about a week ago with all 5 candidates answering some specific questions for our community. So please be an informed voter, and please, more than anything else, please vote.
I just wanted to announce that this weekend, ICRH is preparing its new facilities for opening on the 27th. And we're looking for some volunteers to help finish some of the renovations down there. And also on, let me get this date right, on November 7th, the International Relations Council for City of Mount